The morning smells like bread and safety. You laugh with your husband, wave goodbye and believe the world is kind. But by sunset, your home will burn. Your name will vanish and history will pretend you never existed. Because in 1453, when the Ottoman banners rose over Constantinople, peace itself became a crime worth erasing. The morning begins like any other. The smell of warm bread drifts from your neighbor's oven. Children chase each other down narrow cobblestone streets, their laughter echoing through the village. You pause at your doorway, feeling the sun on your face, unaware that this same light will soon fall upon ashes. Your husband kisses your forehead, promising to return before sunset. You smile, because how could you ever imagine a sunset without him? But before that sun disappears, your world will collapse with such precision, such cruelty, that death itself will feel like mercy. When the Ottoman banners rise over Constantinople, what follows isn't chaos. It's order, and dark methodical order. The empire doesn't conquer by accident. It conquers by procedure. The moment the defenses break, the soldiers do not loot randomly. They sort. Every woman becomes a line in a ledger. Every life becomes inventory. Public squares transform into processing stations. Fires burn in the distance, churches, homes, memory itself. And under that glow, officers begin their selection. Women are divided into 3 categories. The youngest, between 14 and 25, are the most valuable. They're measured, inspected, and cataloged, each assigned a number and an estimated market value. Those between 25 and 40 are deemed suitable for labor, strong enough to serve, too old for what comes next. Women over 40 executed. No debate, no delay. The empire saves resources, even children are not spared. Girls under 12 are taken for what official records call formation programs. But everyone knows what that means. Indoctrination, violation, erasure, and the sorting is public. Mothers watch as daughters are separated forever, as soldiers mark them like livestock and as hope drains from their faces. This was not the madness of war. This was policy, a bureaucratic system that turned humanity into economics and terror into strategy. By the time night falls, the laughter that once filled your village is gone. Only the sound of chains remains. By dawn, the roads leading out of the village are lined with carts, not carrying grain, but people. Women and girls, bound in silence, move toward the empire's ports. The Ottoman soldiers march beside them, not as warriors, but as accountants escorting assets. This wasn't chaos. It was commerce. Within 48 hours of a city's fall, thousands are processed, recorded, and shipped like goods. The empire's documentation was meticulous. Ship manifests from the archives list human cargo alongside silk and spices, 20 bolts of Damascus cloth, 40 sacks of pepper, 15 females aged 16-20, excellent condition, no names, no families, just numbers. The Ottomans didn't invent slavery, they industrialized it. They turned capture into an industry, managed by clerks, inspectors, and tax officers. Specialized markets in Istanbul and Bursa even had human sections, where prices rose and fell like grain stocks. A Greek or Serbian girl could fetch 25 silver pieces. A fair-skinned captive from Eastern Europe, double that. Merchants debated quality as though they were trading fabrics, not flesh. The empire's bureaucrats treated these transactions with chilling normalcy. Receipts, ledgers, and bills of sale survive, documenting human agony in perfect handwriting. Each death, each sale, each transfer of ownership was noted like a business expense. And still, the system evolved. Commanders received bonuses based on the quantity and quality of prisoners taken. The more beautiful the captive, the greater the reward. War became a marketplace. Conquest became incentivized cruelty. The Ottomans discovered something even more powerful than military fear: psychological warfare. Villages that heard what happened to neighboring women surrendered without resistance. They learned that the empire didn't need cannons to break a people, only rumors. In this new order, obedience was survival, and silence was currency. Every mother, every child, every sister taken made the next village weaker. And so the empire expanded, not only by steel but by terror calculated to the decimal. The soldiers called it victory. The ledgers called it profit. History called it civilization. The sea glimmers under the morning sun, but the beauty hides the smell of sweat, fear, and salt. Dozens of ships line the harbor, not built for trade but for transport. Their cargo, human lives. The Ottoman Empire perfected this process. Each ship was a moving cell block, designed to keep its captives alive just long enough to be sold. Below deck, wooden compartments divided by iron bars hold the women. Ventilation slits allow air, but not hope. Water barrels are rationed to the ounce. Every inch of space is measured, every breath calculated. The Empire treated these ships the way merchants treat warehouses: efficient, controlled, profitable. Women stripped of everything: clothes, names, even memory. Each one given a number, a new identity made of ink and fear. They're clothed in identical garments, pale gray, rough to the touch, so that individuality dissolves before the journey ends. A typical voyage lasts a week. A week without sunrise, without prayer, without a single familiar word. Those who cry are beaten. Those who resist are marked. Their value diminished, their fate sealed. 15% never reach the market alive. To the Empire, those were acceptable losses. In ledgers, their deaths are written next to damaged goods or spoiled grain. The same hand that tallied profits also recorded bodies thrown overboard. Their names never known, their only gravestone, the sea. These weren't random acts of cruelty. They were part of a system that understood how to break a person long before selling her, to strip away identity, to remove faith, to erase memory, so that when the body reached the market, the soul no longer resisted. This was dehumanization turned into science. Pain timed like logistics. Grief managed like economy. When the ships finally docked, the women who survived no longer remembered their mother tongues, only the commands of their captors. And as they stepped onto Ottoman soil, their chains didn't end. They simply changed shape. What happened next was more terrifying than chains. Because the Empire didn't just permit this cruelty, it legalized it. In Ottoman courts, the suffering of women became law. Their exploitation wasn't considered a violation. It was recorded, processed, and blessed as divine order. The Empire's jurists wrote it down in detail. If a warrior dies in battle, his enemy inherits his widow. Not symbolically and literally. Within 72 hours of his death, a new owner can claim her as property. If he doesn't, the claim becomes public, and others can contest it. A courtroom argument over a woman's body. Ottoman judges resolved these disputes like trade disagreements, calmly, procedurally, and without shame. The archives still hold those court records, names replaced by descriptions, verdicts signed in careful calligraphy. Every ruling reinforced the same message. Conquest was not sin, it was sanctified. Then came the conversion centers, buildings designed not for prayer but for erasure. Inside, women were forced to renounce their faith, to spit on icons, to burn crosses, to repeat verses they barely understood. Those who refused were broken slowly, not killed. The goal was not death but compliance. Conversion was performed in public squares so that survivors would carry the memory like a brand. Archaeological digs in Bursa and Edirne reveal their blueprints. Chambers with iron rings in the walls, drainage trenches carved into stone floors. These were not temples. They were factories of obedience. The Empire called it reformation, but it was indoctrination through humiliation and reproduction through violence. Each woman forced to conceive became a weapon against her own people. Children born of these assaults were severed from their mothers, their identities rewritten before they could speak. For the Empire, this wasn't cruelty. It was continuity. They believed bloodlines could be conquered as easily as cities, that by rewriting a woman's body they could rewrite a nation's future, and for centuries that belief worked. History remembers the Dev Shirme as a levy that took boys from Christian families. But the same system quietly took girls too. Only their records were buried deeper, hidden beneath the Empire's pride. Young girls were seized from their homes under the same law that recruited boys. But their destination wasn't the palace schools. It was the breeding houses, the Empire's silent factories of life and death. Inside these walls, women weren't mothers. They were resources, each one tracked for fertility, obedience, and endurance. Imperial scribes calculated pregnancy rates, infant survival, and productive lifespan. The data reads like agricultural reports, numbers without faces. Every birth, every death, every miscarriage, written in ledgers as though they were crop yields. 40% of the captured girls died in their first year of captivity. not from execution, but from exhaustion, malnutrition, and repeated assault. The empire recorded those deaths too, as inefficient outcomes. Officials debated what age produced the most resilient stock. 12? 14? What punishment reduced resistance without killing the subject? These weren't questions of morality. They were logistics. To them, pain was a system to be optimized. Military officers who captured the most valuable women were rewarded with gold, rank, and political favor. Traders who delivered the highest quality captives received contracts for future raids. Cruelty became a career path. The empire's borders expanded not just by sword, but by supply chain. Human beings moved like currency, bought, sold, and bred to maintain an empire's appetite for control. And what began as conquest turned into habit. Raids continued long after wars ended. Ottoman scouts mapped Christian villages like merchants planning shipments. They timed their strikes with the harvest season, when families were least prepared to flee. Generations lived in constant terror. Parents scarred their daughters' faces, broke their teeth, or burned their skin, desperate to make them undesirable to the raiders. Love became an act of mutilation. In those dark centuries, a parent's gentlest touch might be the one that left a scar, because scars meant safety. Over time, the raids stopped being events. They became seasons. Entire regions began to live around them, planting, harvesting, hiding, rebuilding, all scheduled between the times when the empire came to take their daughters. Families adapted to survive in ways that no history book records. Mothers learned to quiet crying infants with dirt, not milk, so soldiers wouldn't hear. Villages dug tunnels under barns, hollowed out wells, carved chambers into the roots of forests. Every song, every lullaby became a code, a warning disguised as melody. But the empire always adapted faster. Scouts mapped hiding spots, tortured captured men until they revealed the underground routes, then burned the entrances shut. Each generation inherited the fear, like property, passed from mother to child, and fear worked. Long before Ottoman cannons arrived at city gates, their reputation had already conquered the people. When stories of what happened to women in neighboring towns spread, the next city surrendered before a single shot was fired. The empire learned that terror could travel faster than armies. Even voluntary submission offered no protection. Communities that opened their gates peacefully were often subjected to the same processing, justified as imperial necessity. The empire didn't reward obedience. It demanded permanence of submission. Peace was never the goal. Control was. Centuries later, the traces of that fear still shaped societies. Folk customs emerged. Girls forbidden from leaving home alone, faces veiled, windows built narrow, songs sung in minor tones. These weren't born from religion or tradition. They were survival mechanisms carved into culture by trauma. When an entire civilization reorganizes itself around the defense of its women, you know the enemy it faced wasn't just an army. It was a system, and that system didn't vanish when the wars ended. Its silence became its legacy. Its efficiency became its disguise even now. Ruins and archives whisper the same truth, that the empire's greatest weapon was not steel, but fear that learned how to reproduce itself. The archives still exist. Dust-covered scrolls. Ledgers written in calligraphy so elegant it hides the horror within. Ink that once justified agony still clings to paper. Proof that the suffering was not rumor, not myth, but administration. You can read the numbers, the transactions, the laws. You can trace the handwriting of men who never saw their victims as human. But what you won't find are the voices. You won't find the girl who baked bread that morning. You won't find her name in the ledgers. Only her age, her height, her market value. She vanished into the machinery of empire, one among thousands. But she was real. And for a brief moment she laughed. She loved. She believed the world was kind. The Ottoman conquest of 1453 didn't just end an empire. It erased millions of identities. It turned innocence into evidence and faith into property. The system lasted for centuries because it was efficient, because it was legal, because it was profitable, and because no one wanted to remember. But history doesn't disappear. It waits in the ruins of churches turned to ash. It waits in the unmarked graves beneath cobblestone streets. It waits in the silence between old hymns when where names once belonged. Every record, every court ruling, every transaction proves one thing: this was not chaos. This was design. A civilization built its glory on organized cruelty and called it destiny. So the next time you see a romantic painting of Ottoman grandeur, remember what the artist didn't show. The mothers staring at burning villages, the daughters marched in chains, the children hidden in cellars praying the boots would pass them by. Remember that young woman from 1453, the one who thought she'd see her husband again before sunset. She never did, but her story, buried in silence for centuries, still beats beneath the pages of forgotten archives. Because the truth has a pulse. And every time we tell it, it breathes again. If you believe these stories deserve to be remembered, share this video so that silence is never mistaken for peace again.